You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Rathe. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back to episode 10 of Arsenal Pass. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined always by calling champion Hayden Dale. This week on the show, we're marking our first milestone episode. We're hitting double digits over here with episode 10, and we have something really special for you. An interview with LSS organized play manager and the one half of Session Blood, Kieran McEntegart.
That's right, Brendan. I'm glad you've learned to say Kieran's last name as well, just for the intro to the show. So, yeah, Kieran gave up some of his time this past Saturday morning to talk to us about all things Flesh and Blood, his time with what he's doing with Session Blood with Carol, and, organised play and what LSS has planned in the future. And we even talked to him about something a little bit special and something that we haven't heard much about so far as the judge program. So we're excited to bring you that interview. But before we get into that, Brendan, what have you been playing this week?
So this week, obviously I had a few skirmishes recently. There was a limited one that I did well, and then I had two others where I lost in the quarters and the semis. Other than that, I haven't been playing too much in person. Mostly playing online with my friends. And kind of focusing on Blitz now. I think the Classic Constructed is still kind of the superior format and what we expect to see once the calling does come to the US or Nats does start up. But there are a couple big skirmishes happening this weekend and the next. So to round out the final weeks of Season 2, I'm going to go ahead and focus on Blitz a little bit and see if we can get some good finishes in those bigger skirmishes. What about you, Hayden?
Yeah, nice. So how many skirmishes do you have left now?
I'd have to check my calendar, but it's probably around 4 or 5. It just depends. Like with some of these, like some of them I'll be commentating, or I'll have like maybe a commitment later that day, so I will maybe be able to play half of it or something like that. But I definitely have committed to like 1 or 2 more kind of full events. I know this Saturday, this upcoming Saturday, I have 2 very large and long skirmishes. So one that's like in the morning to afternoon, and then one that's going to go from the late afternoon to the night. So it should be a solid 10 to 12 hours to skirmish, which I don't know if I'm excited for it or I'm dreading it, but I'm going to do it. I'll be on the Kano. But Hayden, what have you been playing?
Yeah, that's a lot of dedication. What have I been playing this week? Yeah, so did a draft in the weekend, which was great. I actually didn't do very well in that draft. It was a tough draft. I thought my deck looked pretty good. Was drafting a Bolton deck. Felt pretty open pack 1. They got pretty cut. There ended up being 3 Bolton drafts at the table, but it didn't really feel like that even on the wheel in pack 1. So quite interesting. Played some Blitz this week. Played Kano and Blitz as well. I've got 1 Blitz skirmish left to go this season that I'm new playing in. Most of the ones here down in Australia are actually sealed. So I have 2 sealed ones next week, and I'm playing an online Blitz one, the CFB event, and that's about it. So I wanted to get some reps in with Kano. I think all my games lasted 2 turns, which was interesting.
Standard. Welcome to Blitz.
Yeah. And then I went back to some pure Classic Constructed last night. Played some Chain. Played the if people haven't seen it, played the list that we featured in our deck tech this week. So got in 3 rounds with that and won a nice wee foil Ravenous Meat-Axe. So yeah, that's my week so far.
Yeah. Ravenous Meat-Axe, that's a very, very on-brand promo for you as well. But that mirror is, I do not envy you for having to play that more than once.
Yeah, I played 2 mirrors in the event, which was, I don't know, the mirror of the Chain mirror can be a little bit, how many out of wars did you draw? How many? So it's.
We can just say terrible. It's that word is allowed. So yeah, not a very good mirror to play. I'm pretty excited to brew up the next deck that will just slap that deck, because I cannot fathom just playing that list into that list like a straight mirror is pretty miserable. I know into the previous Shane list, it felt pretty good because you had chains and it was just kind of a better deck. It seemed like. But now I think it's time to brew up a new hero. Maybe Azalea will come out of the woods.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's time for Azalea. I think either
took it off the tip of your tongue, eh?
100%. I was waiting for it. You knew I was waiting for it. I think either some iteration on this list could be in order, or I think just look at what ways to attack the meta if chain does become so prevalent. So that's next on the agenda for sure.
Yeah, awesome. So let's head into the news, Hayden. You got some updates for us?
Yeah, one thing I want to start with to share is actually we didn't speak about this last week or even the week before. I think it went up just as we recorded 2 weeks ago, and then we omitted it last week. Apologies, but the comp rules are up now. So the comprehensive rules are up. They have released it's big document if people have the time or want to go and look at it. You don't need to, but it could be helpful for those that are really looking to get into the competitive side of the game, or even thinking about applying for the judge program once that becomes available. There's already been 2 erratas for 2 cards that have come out of Monarch, with Seeds being one of them and Vestige of Soul the other, which I thought was quite interesting just reading through that. So people may or may not have already heard about this, but Vestige of Soul has been amended so that the effect is a replacement effect, not a triggered effect. The way it kind of read initially on release was that if you pitched, say, a blue card to play a 4-cost aura, you wouldn't be able to pay for it because you wouldn't get that resource off the Vestige. So now in situations like that would work with all the prerequisites, of course. And then the Seeds is now been changed, which was changed on release actually, the Seeds, so that now it's a single trigger. So you can Arcane Barrier each individual one of them, rather than it being one total source and only be able to stop 1 damage if there was 4 or 5 Seeds on a Riftbind, which would have been absolutely disgusting. So I'm glad they've changed that.
Was that actually how it was written? Because the way I read it, that wasn't my first reaction, but I know there was a lot of people that thought that it was, like stacking the arcane damage. They're like, oh, arcane damage 4 because of my 4 Seeds. So is there an actual issue with the way it's written? How did they errata that?
I think that was the issue was the win on the attack. That's my understanding anyway. But either way, either it was that or it's just, as you say, a misunderstanding on release. But definitely there was the errata, which clears up a lot of how that stacks. So and I think they were also maybe fixing that for templating moving forward to make sure that they have this when attacking. Sorry.
Yeah.
In terms of other things in the news, on Fab TCG, there's a recap up for the Auckland Calling, which is a great way to just sort of skim through what happened in the event, both main event and side event Pro Tour Quest. And as well, noticed up this week as well, we're through 5 weeks of Skirmish Season 2, or into week 5 of Skirmish Season 2, which is pretty crazy. There's 60 Skirmish events going on this week. Obviously, Brennan, you've got, you're doing a day of skirmishes. People around the world will be playing a lot of skirmishes this week, so I think that's so awesome. I just wanted to shout out as well, we've got the Channel Fireball Skirmish next week that myself and I know some other CFB content creators going to be playing, so if people want to jump into that, you can. It's at 9 a.m. Pacific time on June 26th. It's Blitz constructed. It's a online event, so we'll put the link in the description if you want to jump in and join that. Should be some fun times doing some Blitz skirmish battling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course the Calling US was teased during the stream for the Auckland Limited Calling Monarch. We don't have any further updates with that, but definitely mark off that calendar all 30 days for the Calling US. Whether it will be classic constructed, Blitz, limited, who knows? But I think it was confirmed they have booked a venue. So
wow.
My assumptions, my guess is either Vegas, Texas, or Florida. I'd be surprised if we go anywhere else, but who knows at this point. But yeah, hoping and kind of thinking it's somewhere in the South just because of the current situation over here. But yeah, very excited. And yeah, just stay on the lookout. I'm sure we'll get some updates soon.
Yeah, we'll definitely, any updates we see or hear, we'll let you know on the pod. Same with the Melbourne Calling as well. So, of course, that was moved out. The tentative date, I believe, is July 10th, is what LSS have said. But, we'll let everyone know once we hear the confirmed date. Looking forward to that, though.
Yeah, just want to quickly ask you, Hayden, as well, since we are live, if there is a U.S. Calling, well, if there is, right? So there probably is going to be, right? They've announced it. But are you going to be traveling to the U.S.? Will you be seeing all your American friends?
I'd love to. Just have to see what happens with international travel. Currently not on the table here in Australia, so we'll see what happens. I'd love to, though. Love to get back over that way.
Awesome. So you heard it here first. Hayden is confirmed going to be at the U.S. Calling. Anyway, I also want to shout out, shout out one of our videos we put up on the Arsenal Pass the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel, actually. It's a deck tech for that constructed Blitz deck that Hayden was talking about. He just played at locals. So Hayden, Dan Mackay, and one other, I forget his name, Hayden.
Mo, and it's a classic constructed deck, not Blitz.
Yeah, classic constructed. They played this at the side event, the PTI event, at the Calling, and I think the deck got 2nd, 4th, and 11th. So it did pretty well. So we decided to run through that, talk about the deck, talk about the choices, the matchups, pretty much everything you need to know. So if you have any interest in playing Shane in constructed or playing against him, I recommend you check out the video. Should be some good tips in there. Mm-hmm. And with that, we do have some videos going up on CFB as well. We do play that classic constructed Shane deck against the deck it lost to in the PTI, a Ninja Control deck. That'll be up on CFB this week, I think. And always, if you are on CFB, you're shopping around, and you happen to be checking out, we would appreciate if you throw in our affiliate code upon checkout. That's just Arsenal Pass. The show name, no space, Arsenal Pass. So yeah, if you have the chance when you're checking out, we always appreciate it. And heading into our next section, I want to give you an update on a quick little anecdote, Hayden. We had this winter in Texas, like the craziest winter of like 100 years, right? It was so cold. It was actually below 0 Fahrenheit for us, and I think it snowed for like a week. It was crazy. But now we've hit the summer, and apparently we're hitting like record numbers now in the summer as well. And they're asking us to leave our thermostats at like 80 degrees. So it's just absolutely ridiculous over here. Our power grid can't handle the winter and can't handle the summer, it seems. But I know it seems like going off topic, but speaking of summer, they're on those sunnies. Let's head to the grill. It's the Command and Cookout section. We got a question for us this week, Hayden?
I was waiting to see where that went. Yes, we got a question, Brendan. Look, I hope you're able to stay cool in other ways then. Yeah, we got a question this week in the section. So a bit of a shorter question this week as we head into this interview with Kieran. It's a really great interview. Don't want to take away from that too much. It went a bit longer than we thought it would, mostly because we just had a lot to ask Kieran, and he had a lot to say, which was fantastic. So we had a question that popped up sort of twice over on episode 8 when we asked for some questions, and two listeners, Snarky and Tanmay, they asked a very similar question around being new to Flesh and Blood. Snarky actually asked, as a new player to Flesh and Blood, what budget decks would you recommend in Blitz and Constructed to learn the fundamentals with intent to be competitive? And then Tanmay had asked, what class do you think is best for learning, best to learn for getting better and more advanced understanding of the core facets of the game? So, very similar questions. One's a bit more budget orientated, and one's just which classes and decks should I look at? What do you think, Brendan?
Yeah, so for budget decks, I'd like to pull from the Gauntlet. So we do have that Gauntlet tournament over the Discord. It's around 45, 50 players a week. Tends to be very competitive, but at that, we do see a few budget decks sneak into the top 8 week by week. Most notably, those have been, I think, Dorinthia and Shane. I think those decks can do quite well without their, legendaries or majestics or whatever. So I think if you're looking for cheap decks, kind of those aggro, just in-your-face decks, very punishing, can be pretty good if you're looking to pick up wins. Are those going to teach you the core fundamentals of the game? In my opinion, no. I think that Warrior is probably one of the worst classes to start out on if you want to actually learn how to play Flesh and Blood, especially Tall Warrior. Most of the heroes play vastly different to that strategy, and I think that you can ignore a lot of core games concepts like paying attention to your deck, pitching to win, and kind of playing the entire game of Flesh and Blood, because you end up sort of just playing like 2 to 3 turns and then the game is over. But that's also Blitz that I'm talking about. What do you think, Hayden?
Yeah, I might have a bit of a controversial one in Blitz, and that's actually Ira. I think Ira is just a really great hero for learning the core fundamentals of Flesh and Blood and getting better at it. Your games are probably not going to be as fast as some other decks. You're going to need to look at how to trade damage versus blocking, how to pitch the bottom of your deck even in Blitz. And yeah, I think that's important. And I think Ira is actually really good and healthy for the game because of what it does. It's very simple to play, but it also helps you with practicing and tuning those sort of core fundamentals of, presenting threats, the opportunity cost of cards, on-hit effects, all those things. So I really do think, whether it be a budget version of Ira, whether it be a fully scaled out version of Ira, I think is a great place to start. In terms of Classic Constructed, I actually would say I think Rhinar is actually a great place to start and learn the game, which sounds maybe a bit odd with, Intimidate as a mechanic, but that's kind of why I think it's really important, is that when I see people playing Rhinar, a lot of the time people who have maybe had less experience or back in the day with Welcome to Rathe, people would just play Rhinar and just be like, I'm on the RNG bandwagon, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to, scav skin here. I'm just going to like discard to my hand, even though I only have 1/6 attack and a non-6 attack. But actually, if you focus on the core fundamentals of the game, Rhinar is a hero that can really help you practice that, because, you've got to stack your deck or, pitch your deck to get the right number of 6 attacks or your threats late once you've got a higher density of cards in your deck that do something. So say it's something like a Blood Rush Bellow, you're pitching early to set up late with 6 attacks and relevant cards. Or, you're not relying on the RNG piece, you're actually thinking about how to block damage and then present damage back. So and Romping Club is really good for that because it's a 4 attack for 2 cost weapon. So yeah, I would say Rhinar is a great place to start in Classic Constructed, actually, and I think you can do that on all budgets as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And without further ado, our very special guest for this week's episode, Kieran from Session Blood. We're so excited to have you on the podcast, and thank you for joining us. How are you doing, Kieran?
Very good, thank you. I'm stoked to be here. I love the work you guys do on the podcast, and yeah, I've done a bit of commentary, I think, in the past with you and Hayden. So yeah, I've been looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
So, Kieran, you're a former competitive player, a calling runner-up, in fact, a podcast extraordinaire, and all-around legend in Flesh and Blood. And you recently made the move to Legendary Studios as an organized play manager. So there's a lot to unpack there. So why don't you start, kind of with your background in Flesh and Blood and just how you got into the game?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to agree with everything you just said. Bit of a
Legend.
There are a couple of things in my interview writer, a few more honorifics you left out, but that's fine. We'll move on. So my background in Fab, basically, I used to play, a few other card games back in the day, those that will not be named. And then got to a point where occasionally I'd go off and play the occasional draft and stuff of other games. And then one of my friends, guy Tom Penny, the man, the myth, legend, tried to get myself and Carol into the game. So Carol and I were flatting together at this time with a few other flatmates, and Tom would come around and be like, I'll play a sealed deck, and we'd keep being like, nah, no thank you, nah, not interested. And then eventually Carol caved, and then I think a few days later I'm like, fine, I'll give it a go. So I caved, and I think my very first turn in Flesh and Blood was I was playing Bravo Sealed or something, and I got off a red Slogism into red Regurgitating Slog, dominated for a bunch of damage, and I'm like, you know what, this game's alright.
That's dirty.
Yeah, and then so this is all about sort of November 2019 or so, sometime around then, and then started going to a few road to nationals and stuff like that, and then started training up for the first Classic Constructed Calling, and just went from there.
Yeah, that first Classic Constructed Calling, like I said in the introduction, you got second in that. How was that experience? Kind of being new to the game. Obviously, there was nobody really knew how to test. Nobody knew what kind of decks to expect, and you made it all the way to the finals. How was that experience for you?
I was awesome, man. I loved it. So it was one of probably one of the first big card game tournaments that I went into. Maybe with the exception of one Magic tournament way back in the day where I was really confident. It was probably the first time I went in thinking I feel like I've got a pretty decent shot. So I actually did a decent amount of testing with Carol, like I mentioned, but also one only methodical Matt Rogers. We played a lot of Katsu versus Dorinthia matches in the lead up to that, because I was expecting there to be a ton of Dorinthia at the event, which ended up being. But yeah, it was one of those things where I ended up playing Matt and lost in round 3 in Swiss. So, all my matches were do or die from then. So it's pretty stressful, but managed to make it through to the top 8. One of those things where you make the top 8, I'm just all right, I'm just happy to be here. And then won the quarterfinal, then sort of won the semifinal. I'm like, damn, I've got a shot to do it, to take it all out. Until your evil testing partner Brendan took me down.
I've been telling our listeners that they're all very spoiled nowadays with these 2-day callings. And I think Kieran, you can maybe attest to that with that 15-hour, I think it was like 12 to 15-hour slog you did all the way to the finals.
Yeah, that one was a bit of a thriller. Like, luckily, the deck I was playing, back in the old Welcome to Rathe only meta, the Katsu was like a reasonably quick deck. So, I mean, I probably only had I don't know, 1 or 2 games that went past the 40-minute mark. But yeah, that the top eight, the final of the calling, that was a bit of a thriller. I think that went for like sort of 90 plus minutes.
Yeah.
Played Ninja vs Ninja Control, had a lot of twists and turns. But yeah, it was a great time.
That's awesome. And Kieran, you talked about the evil testing partner of Brendan there, Sasha. You're now your colleague as well. So you recently took a role with Legend Story Studios. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what you're doing at the studio now?
Yeah, not much. I just kind of turn up, chill out, hope the tournaments run well.
That's what Sasha's been telling me, actually.
Yeah. I'll have a word to him.
Showing up. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, yeah. So initially, I actually joined on as sort of a temporary game dev, I suppose, contracting game dev, you might call it, something along those lines. Carol and I did back towards the start of the year. So we're doing that for a little while. And then at a certain point, I was just asked if I would be interested in, potentially also doing something else in the company, or if I wanted to continue with that, or help out with a different role. And organized play was kind of the one that appealed to me a little bit. Like, as a pretty competitive player in my time, I thought having a bit of an influence into how the whole organized play thing works and really making it a good experience for players and everything is something that appeals to me. So yeah, a lot of my day in the early stages was, sort of learning under Alan, who does an amazing job. Big shout out, Alan Hale. Basically just sort of learning the ropes a little bit. There's a lot more that probably goes into organized play than I initially thought. It's not just sort of all rocking up at massive tournaments and saying hello to people and commentating finals and all that sort of thing. There's a lot of it on the ground level, working with stores to make sure their events can go ahead, particularly with logistics, shipping logistics delays, all that sort of thing at the moment. Helping stores set up organized play, and then, for these bigger tournaments, just making sure that you just have all the minor details nailed down so the tournament can run smoothly for players. Because that's the biggest thing for me, players having a positive experience.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And you actually touched upon one of my questions here, which is just how do you kind of end up at a job at LSS? I feel like there's not just a LinkedIn kind of job posting you stumble upon on the internet. Is James actively going out and just scalping the best Flesh and Blood players and taking them to the company? Because it's you got Carol, we got Kieran, we got and there's Pearson's there. It's crazy, right? So how did they approach you for that initial game dev job like you talked about, or did you come to them and say, hey, I want to be more involved, and and so on and so on?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a funny story, that one. So the first kind of point of contact for that was we sort of invited in to film a few gameplay videos. So we're just going to film a few gameplay videos for the channel, really, for the Session Blood channel. We didn't have a great setup. And yeah, I think someone got in touch with Carol, might have been Alan or Sasha or someone along those lines. And we said, yep, we're keen, we'll come on in. So we came in and recorded, this is, I think, somewhat early on, the life of Blitz. So we recorded a few Blitz games. And then sort of before we left, James just had a talk to us and said, would you guys be interested in doing some game dev work starting in the new year? And yeah, we're just that sounds good. I was still finishing off some university stuff at the time, so I had to kind of just figure it out around that schedule. But yeah, like you say, there's some pretty good players in there. Myself, Jacob. Carol may be the exception that proves the rule, but we won't go there.
I noticed you led with yourself there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's but yeah, I feel like the the LSS guys were probably like aware of us a little bit from the Session Blood thing, but also because the New Zealand community is reasonably tight knit, and I was fortunate enough to have a couple of good results just at like nationals and that first calling. So maybe they figured, we'll have a rough idea of what we're doing.
Yeah, and this is my favorite. Like coming into this is gonna be my favorite question. And I asked this to Sasha when he joined as well. But like on a scale of 1 to 10, like how much was your mind blown when LSS opened that Pandora's box for you? When they showed you the expansions, when they kind of outlined the larger plan. Like what was that like? I know you can't describe it in like what they actually showed you, but just what was that experience like? Coming, being a fan of the game, and then just being exposed to like what the game really is.
Well, it was an interesting one for us because like when we signed on, again, it was more initially framed as like a temporary game dev role, rather than joining the company full time. So there's certainly some things that we kind of weren't privy to or weren't fully revealed. So it may have been a little bit different for Sasha because I imagine when Sasha jumped on, it was like a sort of full-time business development thing. So he'd need to see the whole picture, the whole rich tapestry of flesh and blood. Whereas when we jumped in, for me, probably one of the most interesting things was just learning some of like the dev process, like testing how they sort of come up with cards, like the process of what formats tested in which order, like how changes are made to certain cards, all that kind of thing. But yeah, obviously, like seeing an early set sort of many months in advance was definitely something you can sort of lord it over the other people. Like, oh, I know this information you don't. But yeah, there was. I feel like that moment you're describing may have been a little bit different for Carol and myself than for Sasha because it was more sort of staggered over time. Once they're like, all right, yes, sweet. When when we're doing a practice draft, it's not gonna be streamed live to the Session Blood channel and show the next day. Which I feel like it definitely made James nervous. Dropping that joke a few times. He's like, yeah, maybe not.
Like I think it must be crazy, because like the moment in time you described when you kind of come in is like early blitz, right? So you go in, you see this new format, and then as an organized play manager, which I know you kind of transitioned into that role, but you were obviously aware of the information that there was going to be this this pro tour and all this event tiered structure, and I just think that like that is like so exciting. So I can't even imagine how awesome it was to see that this game that you've put your time into, and now that you're gonna put your life into working at the company, like the plans are so big and just like so encompassing for all of us competitive players to kind of pursue this and maybe reap rewards out of it for all the time we're putting in. So I think it's awesome. Yeah,
like sort of fun little trivia fact. I think it was almost like a slight spoiler on the Fab website as to the announcement of like Worlds and Pro Tours, because it was in the ratings policy there. I remember looking it up at one point, sort of figuring out what the ELO policy was for different tournaments before I joined up. And I noticed at the very top there was something that said Worlds and Pro Tour with an additional ELO, and I'm like, it's interesting. Hasn't been announced yet, but okay, let's go.
A few little Easter eggs like that.
Yeah, absolutely. The other funny one, actually, no, I probably can't say that one, but maybe another time.
We'll circle back to that one when you can. We'll have you on another time. We'll say, remember that thing you didn't tell us because you couldn't. What was it?
Yeah.
Look, Kieran, last week, not sure, but if you heard, but last week we touched on the calling and what the experience was like from a player perspective. And one thing that I think is really interesting, and I know our listeners would love to hear, is what is it actually like organizing a calling? What is it like, first of all, beforehand, the event, organizing it, and then what does it look like when, what does your day look like at a calling?
Oh, mate, total walk in the park. No stress, no problems. Yeah, so that's a good question. Like, so organizing a calling, I feel like there's a lot of work that goes into it. So for me, in the organized play sort of area as well, like in my particular role, I'm having a bit more of a focus on like premier organized play. So things like nationals, callings, all that kind of jazz. But walking this tournament, I have to admit I didn't have a ton of tournament organizing experience, which is probably a bit of an understatement. But it's so I'm looking at this thing and initially, so we sort of had the venue sorted out. Big shout out to ATS Center, helping us to run that event. But initially, you kind of look at it from a player's perspective. You're like, all right, so what do we need? We need some tables, we need some chairs. How many rounds? We'll just make it this amount of rounds, and sweet as it's all good. And then you realize it actually needs to be really pretty, very much like planned down to the minute. So, things involving like drawing up a run sheet, like what time do the staff need to be there? How long do we need to allow for, how long do we need to allow for each round? Technically it's 30 minutes, but also there's like pairings and things like this. You got to draw up the floor plans, got to make sure like the marketing assets are ready. Obviously for this one as well, it was a bit of a step up from previous callings in the sense that it was 2 days long. So then we brought in the draft format, not for the first time, because I know previous seal callings have had draft in the top 8, but draft is like a significant portion of the Swiss part of the tournament. So just, making sure we had all the product, and then, a few little extra sort of sprinkles we threw in. Stamping the cards, which I actually thought was quite a cool idea. I'll take credit for that one, to be honest. Like Jason and Sasha kind of came up with that one, thought it would be a good idea for tournament integrity. I fully agree. But just lots of, I suppose, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but I feel the sort of overarching theme is there's a lot of sort of moving parts that are all going on at the same time. So definitely it's not like a one-man show. It's not like I just sat down and did that whole thing myself. Got to give a huge shout out to everyone over at the OP department to help put this together. Alan was invaluable when for certain things it's kind of like I don't know what I don't know. So like I was putting together like the major things, but there were definitely these details that slipped through that Alan's like, have you thought about this area or this area, which was extremely helpful. And big shout out to Callum as well for helping put the whole sort of coverage package together, because that was a big thing I wanted to focus on, is really sort of like elevating our coverage a little bit, having something like the coverage desk, having the occasional interview, sort of a rotating cast of on-site streamers, and I don't know. I'd be interested in hearing your guys' thoughts on that actually, because I was reasonably happy with it, but of course, always open to feedback.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I was going to kind of follow up with, was not to mention the production value was unprecedented to what we had seen before, right? I think that the fact that we were able to see a limited calling finally streamed at all was a gift. Like if you guys had just thrown an iPhone and filmed it, I would have been happy. But I mean, it was totally unexpected for me. We had a full desk, we had rotating commentators, we had interviews, we had James White hopping up there. It was all done very professionally. It sounded great. There were great assets. We had music in between the rounds. The rounds were reasonably timed as well. Like it was done super, super well. I was very impressed, and I think it really set the bar for what Flesh and Blood production and kind of coverage is going to look like moving forward. I thought it was fantastic. I mean, I loved it. It was really, really good.
Yeah, it was one of those things as well where we did do a bit of a review, because there are things we realize we can improve on, and probably number one and that is the ad breaks, which I will admit did drag on for a little bit. It can be a little frustrating as a viewer. I totally understand when it's like you go to an ad break and there's no countdown timer, and it's like, all right, I'm still listening to this music on repeat, I'm still watching these slides. So but we are aware of that sort of thing, and we thought we'd start off, put something together that looked quite nice, and we'd figure out what we needed to improve on for next time, and things like card pop-ups for newer players or more casual viewers who are just kind of trying to follow the action, and working on some stuff for those ad breaks, definitely towards the top of our list.
Yeah, well, you guys did an amazing job. I mean, even not us coverage aside, which was fantastic, but being at the venue, experiencing that weekend, a really well-run event. Having been to large-scale events like that in the past, you guys had a great venue, great staff, and it was run really well. There was no real big disruptions or anything like that. So, kudos to you and the team. I had a question to follow up with. So Auckland was your first calling on the staff. How was it like doing so you had a lot of hats on that day, so you did commentary as well. How was that, doing the commentary piece as well as trying to also partially run an event?
Yeah, so commentary is something I'm really interested in, just to sort of maintain a connection to the game and a connection to the community in that way. because like you guys mentioned earlier, before I joined up, as quite a competitive player, well, at least I thought so, and I really just enjoyed the game. That's like a really big thing for me. Sort of maintaining connection to the game community and sort of understanding what's going on and all that sort of thing. So basically, when I did sign up, one of the initial things I did say in the job interview was like, "Yep, I can do this, but one thing I'd like to do if an opportunity arises is do a bit of commentary here and there. As long as I'm still able to." So there's always those commentators I feel, and I'm not going to name names or anything, but in other card games and stuff where you have that person who was maybe okay in the very early stages in the game, but then kind of loses touch and then doesn't really know what's going on. So I'm going to try and avoid doing that.
I think he's talking about us.
Yeah, the classic old dogs on the desk.
Absolutely not. No, not you guys. It's more reference to other guys. So when I reach that point when I'm a bit sort of over the hill, I'll probably bow out gracefully. But yeah, doing commentary was a really fun experience for me. I've done a little bit here and there. Like, I've commentated, I believe, with Brendan and Dante before, and just some of the Fab Gauntlets and stuff like that. A couple other like smaller tournaments as well. But that was a really fun experience. I thought, all the commentators did, the other ones did a really good job. Like we mainly had sort of Callum, James himself came on for a bit, and Ian, of course. And also we got Carolyn for a guest feature here and there. Yeah, one of the funny ones I think was for James, who obviously James is definitely I feel like a star attraction. Like everyone likes to talk to James, everyone likes to see James. Which is fair enough. He's a magnetic guy, big personality. But initially I feel he wasn't quite sure how busy it's going to be with interactions, so he kind of said to me like, "Yeah, you can sign me up for a couple rounds of commentary. I'll do one or two." But I haven't actually spoken to him about this, but I feel over the course of the weekend he kind of warmed up to it a little bit. So it's kind of like, all right, put me in, coach. I'm up next.
Get the super sub in for top 8.
Yeah. So I thought James did an amazing job. We definitely learned a few things from commentary, just about because I was using a little bit of Magic, a little bit of like esports as my model, and like other card games generally as to how the commentary team should go. I think we learned a little bit about sort of putting certain people together, certain styles of commentary.
Yeah.
For example, James and I did one round together, but we kind of felt that perhaps we weren't the best pairing because we're both like maybe a little bit too analytical. We love getting down to sort of the nitty gritty, like the interactions and flesh and blood. So I think at one point I was like, I'm trying to analyze the sports state, and I managed to talk like at high speed for about 45 seconds straight. I'm like, so this. I'm like, so what do you think, James? And he's like, yeah, I feel you kind of like covered all the talking points I was going to bring up. So
you stole my thunder. Yeah.
Yeah, but one of those things, like so doing commentary and then jumping off and doing other things, like that's definitely something we'll consider, and because we always go back and do a big review of these tournaments, things we can improve upon. That's something I'd like to do going forward as well, commentating a few rounds here and there, but obviously I have to balance that against having, the best commentary possible for the viewers, and also balancing against the fact that, my attention will be drawn off to just make sure everything is going smoothly with the rest of the tournament.
And I just want to say like a big shout out to Callum. Like I thought that the role that he filled very well, and it's not an easy one to do, right? He was like this more of an anchor, right? Kind of doing the play-by-play, analyzing the board state in terms of what's actually represented rather than going into like deep analytical lines. And it's just such an important person to have on the team because it makes the broadcast so palatable for like more casual viewers or just like viewers in general that maybe just, because you have like two very analytical people, and I know this happens a lot with me and Dante, is we just end up talking about, play lines like 45 seconds, 1 minute down the line, and the whole board state is like irrelevant at this point because we've talked like 5 turns in the future. But I was really I was really, really impressed by Callum. I thought he did an amazing job.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you can kind of lose track. Someone pitches a blue card and plays like a red Stony Woodenhog, and the problem was two analytical people. Sometimes you go, okay, so he's pitched a blue and he's played a red Stony Woodenhog. He's got 1 resource remaining, and you cover that in about 3 seconds, and then it's the next minute is, all right, so if he defends here, is he worried about this and this and this? And
he's got to consider his pitch now. And
yeah. Whereas I think Callum's really good, at sort of bringing it along and being like, okay, guys, well, maybe we should think about two cards are going to defend with. Let's have a look at life totals. So I thought Callum did an amazing job, like sort of general emceeing that play by play as well. And yeah, I feel he'll definitely be back in future to do commentary for future events.
Fantastic. All right. Well, it sounds like you had a pretty good weekend and all around a very successful weekend. I have one last question about the Auckland Calling weekend before we move on to some other questions. And that's, Kieran, what happened at the Battle Hardened?
Oh, the old Battle Hardened day. Well, I mean, I have a bit of a funny story here because I turned up to Battle Hardened over at Card Merchants, and at one point, like there was, I wouldn't say there were things going wrong. There was just one or two things to resolve. So I was a little bit kind of like in my head. I'm like, okay, I got to do this. So I walk up and see Carol, and I'm like, hey, Carol. And then this other dude's like, oh, hi, Kieran. And I just kind of say hi and go straight back to my phone. And then, this very handsome man takes 2 or 3 steps away, and Carol turns to me and goes, bro, that was cold. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, that's Hayden Dale. So then I'm like, oh my God. So I tip my head and I say, Hayden, come over here. Come give me a hug. And I apologize profusely. But
I love it. Hayden's like, hey, Karen. You're like, no autographs today. Sorry, sir.
And that's not even what I meant, Kieran, but thanks for bringing that up. I was actually wondering what happened with your record at the Battle Hardened.
Okay. I was kind of hoping to dodge that part of the question, a little bit of a deliberate misinterpret. So, Battle Hardened, yeah, so the LSS staff got given a bunch of like bounty prizes. I think there were initially thought there were going to be 5 rounds. We actually got handed out 4 of each bounty, so it's kind of like, don't go 0-5 or you get fired. So we it was team sealed, and honestly, I'm just gonna throw my teammates under the bus here. Like we opened a okay pool. Like I feel we gave Callum the prison deck, Carol had the Bolton deck. I feel like I got left with the dregs. They're like, oh, here's this Levi deck with like 7-6 power cards. It's like and all this nonsense. So we swiftly proceeded to lose our first 2 rounds, but luckily we came back in the last 2 and went 2-2. I finished with a personal record of 1-3.
Solid.
You keep the job another day with that win, right?
Yeah. Former competitive player, emphasis on the former, right there, I suppose.
Got it.
Well, that actually,
You
just gonna say, Hayden, it just reminds me. Speaking of like when I just mentioned your name, that reminded me when I was actually testing for the very first calling. The first constructed one with Matt a bit, and we were sort of talking about like the players to watch out for New Zealand and ones coming over from Australia. I do remember very early on, and this is no lie. He said to me like, yeah, one of the better Australian players, a guy called Hayden Dale, who's very good, but unfortunately for him, he can't make it over because I think you had like a wedding on or something that weekend.
Yeah. I was super pumped about that one as well.
Yeah, Matt's telling me he's like, oh, this guy Hayden can't make it because he got a wedding, and externally I'm like, oh no, unfortunate, and then like internally I'm like, don't know who this guy is. Apparently he's really good, can't make it. Like, yeah, sweet, let's go.
One less.
We felt the absolute same way. It was like, yeah, we're so happy that Hayden was able to make it. In retrospect, maybe it was a shame. Could have thrown him on the first round feature or something like that. But we all know Isaac Olsen holds that spot. I have to ask you, Karen, is that on purpose? You put Isaac Olsen on feature round 1?
Well, I do remember seeing him after round 1. He was like, you guys are cursing me. You're always putting me up round 1 feature match. But well. Yeah, because with that, with the like kind of sort of increased coverage, or the elevated coverage, as I like to describe it. I've probably been watching a little bit too much RuPaul's Drag Race, but I like to describe things as elevated now. But anyway, we understood we kind of needed someone in the producer role of like picking the feature matches, walking the players over. There's like the rope and stanchion sort of thing, so you unhook it and usher them in. Yeah. But unfortunately, Sasha was like feeling very ill on the day, so maybe something like bit of food poisoning, something like that. So he wasn't able to make it in. So we did need to get someone to fill that role. So none other than the man himself, James White, took over that. So he actually handpicked most of the feature matches throughout the tournament, aside from when he was on commentary, and towards the very end, I believe the head judge Jason helped us out a little bit with that. So I can't actually give you an insight into the mind of James, but yeah, perhaps he was looking at going like a former sealed calling champion what might be someone to get in there on the feature match round one. But I did enjoy telling people, when they walked up the feature match area, I said, "Look, mate, just got to let you know, James White personally picked you for the feature match."
The Isaac Olsen round one feature match is probably my favorite tradition of Flesh and Blood right now, because he was round one feature. This one wasn't streamed. He was round one featured at the Calling, the constructed Calling for Welcome to Rathe, the one that Kieran got second. He was round one feature at the Blitz one that happened in 2021.
Had nothing to do with us, by the way.
Yeah, and then he was round one feature in this one. So that was I love it. I love it, and I know Isaac absolutely hates it, but
Hey, you'd be 2 if you were 0 for 3. It's all right, Isaac.
Yeah. The guy's on commentary for that match too, and it turned out I think he ended up just getting like a little bit run over by the other guy's deck in the end, unfortunately. But
it would be very off-brand for him to win. I think he was just trying to do it for the viewers,
Isaac, if you're listening next time, we'll put it on the feature match. You're going to take it out. I believe in you.
Put him in on round 2.
Yeah.
Yes. No, that's good. So Kieran, I'm gonna hit you with a little bit more hardball, but just go into whatever you can. I just wanted you to give us an idea of the macro strategy of Flesh and Blood organized play. For instance, like what is Flesh and Blood trying to achieve regarding organized play that other games are not?
Okay, we're getting into the tough questions now. We're all friends. It's all fun and games, and then we start throwing out words like macro strategy. No, that's a good one. That's a good question. In my mind, it's I guess a little bit about what Fab's trying to do that other games aren't, but in my mind, it's also about sort of executing what we are trying to do really well and to a high level. So I feel for Flesh and Blood, we've actually had like a rapid expansion in players probably over the last, 6-9 months, like a year. Like I feel everywhere you look, there's a lot of people playing Flesh and Blood, right? Mm-hmm. And the organized play scene, a lot of the plans that we, that we've really been wanting to do or have kind of had in the works have just had to be shelved a little bit purely due to things like, COVID, health and safety restrictions, because the safety of the players, I feel everyone agrees, always has to come first. And that's kind of the number one baseline. But secondly, when you're looking to organize these major tournaments, like, as it happened in Melbourne, everything can be looking fine. And then sort of a week or two out from the tournament, it has to be postponed or cancelled. And that is also not ideal for everyone, because I know a lot of people sort of organize travel and stuff like that, have to sort out accommodation, and we just like to give players a little bit of certainty. But I think for Fab moving forward, what I can say is, I feel probably our biggest thing right now is we want to be bringing large-scale organized play events to the regions that sort of haven't really had a chance to happen so far. So obviously, the United States is a big one. As we all know, we've got a calling scheduled for later this year in the United States. I'm sure you'll be there, Brendan. But also, a lot of our other markets, places in the APAC region, of course, Europe as well. Basically, that's something I can say without going to like a whole lot of details, because, while we're still sort of finalizing things internally, or there's sort of confidential information that I can't disclose, what I can say is like plans are sort of actively in the works to be bringing these large-scale events to these regions. And I think what we, in my mind as well, it's kind of about giving people a realistic opportunity to play in organized play events at the skill level that they're interested in playing at. So, for example, I know like that's why I feel working. Ellen and I kind of make a good team sometimes, because Ellen has said to me, he considers himself somewhere more towards the casual side of the spectrum, or like, just is interested in playing a bit more for fun, whereas I'd probably classify myself more towards the competitive side. I would like to test significantly and try and win these big tournaments. In my mind, like a good spot for Flesh and Blood organized play to be in is where there's a little bit of something for everyone. So, if you're, and also there's like a legitimate ladder which you can kind of climb up to get to these big tournaments. So there is sort of a little bit of aspirational gameplay going on. So, you might start off playing a few armories, and then I feel Skirmish has been a really good example of giving people meaningful access to competitive play. So, you might jump on a Skirmish, and once you get into the few later rounds, you might start playing, these really top competitive players like Dante and all that. And then when you have that experience, you might say, well, maybe that's just enough for me. I play a couple times a week. I like playing Armory and Skirmish. Or it might prompt you to say, well, now that I've got the taste, I want to keep going. Like, what's the next thing coming up? Like, okay, I hear there's Road to Nationals coming along. What does that involve? Okay, so if I go to Road to Nationals and I qualify and I do well, I can make it to Nationals. But if I don't do well enough at Road to Nationals, I can still be part of my local community, turn up to these Armory events, and I can get XP, which might qualify me for these big tournaments.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I know a lot of this maybe come across as like a little bit vague, and sorry, like some of that is kind of intentionally so because it's just a few things that I legitimately can't talk about. But my big thing is like, as a sort of, again, like I don't really like to bash other games because I feel it's more about what we can do well than what other games maybe haven't done so well in the past. But from a personal experience thing, as a Magic player in New Zealand back in the day, I always felt it was like a little bit difficult to achieve that dream of having like a legitimate chance to play at these really big tournaments, things like Grand Prix or Pro Tours, things like that. For me, I think if we... Oh, sorry.
Oh, faux pas number one. Yeah.
Yeah. And my phone go off, but for me, it's about sort of giving players, like no matter what region you're in, giving players a legitimate pathway to playing at the competitive level they want to. So if you're perhaps living in somewhere of a smaller region, you actually, by just being part of the community and playing a lot of games, you actually have a legitimate chance to maybe go ahead and play at a Pro Tour one day, or you can go to a calling and you can practice with your buddies, sort of, practice a whole lot going into a tournament, then go to a calling, make top 8, get your invite, go to the next Pro Tour. If you do really well there, maybe make it to Worlds. So, yeah, like for me, it's just having like a really good spread of tournaments, like sort of good prize pools, and some of that's made up of cash and some of that's made up of like promo cards and promo payments, which everyone really likes. And yeah, just basically being like, if you want to play competitive flesh and blood, then there's many, many, many options to do so, rather than just sort of, okay, I can go play Armory like once a week at my local store, and then that's it, because the other closest event to me is like a 4,000-kilometer flight away or something along those lines. And I mean, in saying that, I understand it probably is a little bit like that for some people in the world at the moment, but believe me, we are actually sort of actively bringing these big events to other regions. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. I think one of my favorite things about, or the confidence I have in yourselves as a team there, is that the fact that you guys are all players. You understand what players want and what we want to see and how to deliver that. So 2 callings in this area and in this sort of next 4 weeks, with Auckland just happening and hopefully Melbourne coming up. So you guys are already well on the way, and then the US in September is such an exciting announcement. We've already kind of talked about some questions that maybe me and Brennan had lined up. I think because you gave us such a a really comprehensive view of what OP means to yourselves and the team. Can I maybe just ask that for for our listeners, you give a bit of an outline of what OP looks like for the rest of the year. Obviously, of course, for what you can say. Just a quick timeline of what we're going to see over the next 6 months or so.
Yeah, well, I feel like the really big one that I can go into. So I feel the calling in September in the United States, that's probably going to be one of the initial highlights for the US community, and well, probably the North American community in general, depending on if Canadian players are able to travel down. I'm guessing that will be dependent on COVID restrictions and everything. But I feel like the most exciting one coming up in my mind is sort of Road to Nationals and then National Season. So that is in the works at the moment. Like I say, I can't sort of go into... I can't really go into like really deep detail on this, but I know a question that has come up previously is, I was talking to Dante the other day, and he was asking me like, is there a chance that the US and Canada are just going to get combined into this like big North American regionals event? And like, no, short answer, no. Like, because when we say like national champs, I feel, generally speaking, like, it's cool to be the national champion of your country. Like, that actually, I feel like really means something. And that's quite like a good point of pride. And it means like leading into things like world championships. It's not sort of, I'm the champion of the Oceanic region. It's like, I'm actually going there representing like New Zealand, or I'm going there representing Australia. And I know that New Zealand, as you will know well, Hayden, New Zealand and Australia, we've got like a pretty good friendly rivalry going on. And I have heard it's pretty similar with the United States and Canada. So I think it'd be a little bit unfair to just lump them all together.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to start working on my citizenship so I can fly over there for the Nats.
So the big thing is trying to bring these road to nationals and nationals to as many markets as possible. There is a little bit of a qualifier in that when I say we're being a national champion really means something, so we don't like to lump regions together. There may be sort of and again, like, don't sort of quote me on this, but there may be sort of very limited circumstances where if there's a case where it might be difficult based on the player numbers for a certain country to have a nationals event or something, but they're perhaps in a block of countries that are very close to each other, things like that. That would probably be the instance where we consider potentially consolidating events, like maybe. So there's been no firm decision on that yet. But in my mind as a player, and having that experience of like New Zealand being a small market for other card games in the past, I feel like from a player's perspective, you'd rather have a chance to play like a regionals event with maybe like one or two countries, maybe like 2 or 3 countries combined into that, rather than the alternative being there's like no nationals at all for any of those countries involved.
100%. Yeah, I mean, that's the main. You just want to be able to compete and play, right? I know last year watching with great envy as across the ditch, you guys got to play out nationals.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, like I feel I've kind of got a little bit sidetracked there, because that's like the primary consideration is that like wherever possible we're going to push for countries to have their own nationals events. Like so consolidating events isn't really something that we really want to do. It would only be sort of in certain circumstances, if it's very difficult to give a particular country, if the market's still, well, not even the market, just if like the player base is still like relatively small, but we like really want to bring them a significant premier event, and there might be sort of a country nearby where it's a similar sort of player base, and we think, well, rather than in both countries you get nothing, then we could offer to them, hey, how would everyone feel about if we for all of you one big event and give you a shot to qualify for Worlds and like win these really cool prizes?
Yeah, and growing markets, for sure. And
there's sorry, just quickly, there's one thing I want to talk about as we like wrap up OP and kind of your talk here, is that the online skirmish series. So obviously that was a product of COVID health restrictions, but it's actually fascinating what that did to the game and what it did to the player base, especially to the talent here in North America. I think that the same is true for Europe and probably certain regions of APAC as well. But it was like this weird consequence where, prior to this, I guess we can kind of just not really count the first few US callings because they were in 2019. Not too many people knew about the game. So there was like these packs of local groups, right? You'd have like a local group where I am, and then there'd be like one out in California, and then all throughout the US and throughout Canada, but they didn't know about each other, right? And they might have their best player or something for each group. But then Skirmish brought, putting these skirmishes online brought these huge weekend events every single weekend, 2 to 3, maybe 4, where it's a 128 player skirmish, maybe 200 player skirmish. And like the best players in this region, like North America, and probably Europe as well, were forged from that process, from grinding those online skirmishes. Going to those 200 player events every single weekend, and you would play those events, and every single time you got to the top 8, it was nearly the same people. You'd be playing Dante, you'd be playing Tower, you'd be playing Sharif from Europe, and plenty of more players. But it's just fascinating how that worked out and what the ecosystem it created, right? So now instead of just my local group where I was limited to 20 people, like a 30-person meta, now I have the entire North American region, as well as APAC and all of that, because of some of the connections I made when I went over there. But it's fascinating now, because now the people that I play with, like one of them's in California, a few of them are in Canada, and it's like we're all kind of like commingling and like coming together to kind of and bring up the region as a whole. We've all improved as players so dramatically. Like I can't even play it down enough. Like the amount of the amount Skirmish has contributed to the North American player skill like going up is just it can't be understated. And it's like before that happened, basically we had no chance versus New Zealand, Australia, these places where you do have these events all the time. So you guys have been playing for a long time. But then we basically got like a microcosm of that through the online skirmishes. And I just think it's an awesome side effect of what was an unfortunate situation turned out to be actually really fortunate for some of us here in like the US and Canada and Europe and all that.
Yeah, I've been like thrilled to see the uptake on Skirmish, and I know when Carol and I were doing the podcast a little bit more regularly, and something we've been keen to do more regularly is put a bit of a spotlight more on some of these good international players, like international obviously from New Zealand perspective, us down at the bottom of the world here, but I think it's been really cool to see some of these players in North America, players in APAC, players in Europe really start to sort of forge a name for themselves online. I think obviously the sort of one that comes to mind immediately is Dante Delfico, the one and only. Lovely guy and like a really good player. But like you say, so we have players in the UK, players like Sharif, players like Simon Denning, who've been sort of mainstays in the community over there, always done really well. And obviously yourself over in the States, Brendan, Tower Number 9, we got Rob Seigel, people like that. We got over in Singapore, we've got people like Eugene Fu, I believe. And like it's been great for me to see like these people start to play a bunch of skirmishes and start to sort of rocket up the XP leaderboards. I actually think it's been great. One thing, I've always been a big cheerleader of the international community, just like in general, because I know early on New Zealanders and Australians to a certain degree had like a big head start, but in particular New Zealanders, because we've had like a lot of in-person tournaments and we've got to like, I can go down to my local armory and I might play players, back in the day, I'd go to my local armory and the armory might be 8 people and like 3 of them are sort of Matt Rogers, Jacob Pearson, Kale McCreath, and then there might be like Rohan Khanna. So, I'll go down to my 8-person army and we'll have like some of the top players in the world just right there I can play against whenever I want. But in saying that, I feel, I love it. I love us Kiwis down here, and I love the country, and I love all the local community. But the thing I've been trying to sound the warning for a little bit is like all the players here. You gotta be careful. You can't get too complacent, because I think there's occasionally been this little bit of a thing, which has changed over time, that that the Kiwis that we're just sort of inherently the best. Like that we're the natural players of the flesh and blood TCG. It started here, the game was invented here. We're the best players around. But I am really, really looking forward to when the world opens up a little bit more and we're able to have some of these international tournaments. As you mentioned, of course, like Skirmish has been one of them. Sometimes with time zones, it's a little bit harder for players to cross over. But I'm really looking forward to when the world opens up more and we have some of these big international tournaments where players from all around the world show up. I'm very, very keen to see how it all shakes out. I'd love to see, as much as, I'll probably be a little bit of me, like sort of secretly rooting for the Kiwi players. I 100% would not mind seeing, someone from like Singapore, the States, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Great Britain, any one of the regions around here, Canada, take out like a major international tournament and sort of say, look, we've arrived on the scene, we're here to stay.
You can do it, yeah. And Kieran, I wanted to ask you as well, what other projects are you working on at the moment alongside your OP responsibilities?
Yeah, so one of the big things, and I know a lot of people in the community be interested about this, is the judge program. So I think like judges are kind of the lifeblood in a way of a lot of competitive card games, competitive tournaments, because simply put, you got to have qualified judges, right, at these big events. For New Zealand callings and things like that, it's fine because we can largely use sort of LSS staff. But you may have noticed that the Auckland Calling, I want to give a huge shout out to Joshua Scott, Moonlight Solace on Discord. Probably not a lot of listeners have heard of him. Did an amazing job judging, and he's put in a lot of effort to sort of having a look through the comprehensive rules, answering people's judge questions online. So, I think Josh Scott is like the type of person I see that, we want to have a lot more of. If I could have 50 clones of Josh Scott and spread them throughout the world, I would do it in a second, because he's very, very good. But the judge program is something, we are working on at the moment. I'm definitely sort of got that as one of my priorities, but it's just something we want to make sure we get right, because I know people have been asking about it for a while. I know people have been expressing interest in becoming a judge, but I think it's just important that when it's released, we don't sort of release something that's, kind of a bit half-baked or riddled with errors or anything like that. I think the good thing to get out there would be just to have the initial tiers of the judge test. So, for example, you might have something like a level 0/rules advisor, and this would be something that you don't even necessarily have to have played Flesh and Blood, but if you're an LGS owner or someone in the community that wants to help out, the questions might revolve around more like, where can you find the rules, or like, how long should a round of Blitz be, or Classic Constructed, just things that allow you to run a tournament and have the basics down. And then you might move up to your level 1 judges, where we start to ask a few slightly more difficult rules questions. And level 1 judges, you might be able to say be a floor judge at something like the Calling or National Championships, or maybe you can like head judge a Road to Nationals or a ProQuest, things along these lines. Again, like these aren't set in stone, these things. It's just giving a rough framework of potentially how we see the judge program going. And then you might level 2 judge, for example, perhaps a level 2 judge would be able to head judge something like a Calling. But I just wanted to throw a mention of that in there, because I know people have been asking about it, and I know we've sort of been saying it has been coming, but I can tell you it is actively being worked on. I've even been doing a bit of work on some of the judge test questions in the previous weeks, working closely with our sort of top game devs and top rules experts to make sure we get that correct. And yeah, so the judge program, I can't give a firm timeline, but it is coming. And once it's been put together, I'd be very happy to get some community judges involved and start getting some community judges out there at these big events.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
A big shout out to Josh Scott as well. He is the head admin on the Discord, and I'm endlessly grateful to all the work he puts in. But yeah, really just a fantastic member of the community. I know he writes up, like, once the comprehensive rules came out, he writes up a lot of the kind of addendums that we have in the community to those rules that go into a lot of specifics. So really awesome guy.
Good stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And Kieran, thanks for that explanation. Before we jump into some sort of final quick fire questions for you, I did have one final question. We wanted to ask a bit more about the OP pathways and stuff, but I know there's a lot you can't say, and a lot of things in the works right now. But one thing that we're in the middle of right now is Skirmish Season 2, which is, as you just talked about, a fantastic event for people around the world, be it in-store play or even still for some online play where that's happening around the world. What will skirmishes look like going forward? Is there anything you can say on that about, will we have multiple skirmish seasons a year? Is this something that's going to keep going for players alongside armories? Is that sort of tier 1 introductory sort of piece?
Yeah, I think Skirmish, as I said, Skirmish has been a huge success, but I feel like one thing we probably keep in mind, and like we've still got sort of internal discussions and ongoing around the role of Skirmish. I think it's been sort of fantastic, the uptake on Skirmish. I guess one thing we do need to be a little bit worried about is sort of Skirmish fatigue, of just having it constantly running year round. I think things like Road to National seasons provides a potentially like a natural break, and when there's a lot of Road to Nationals going on, there might not sort of simultaneously be skirmishes going on at the same time. That's not like an official policy, but that's just sort of one thought that comes to mind. As far as the role of online skirmishes goes going forward, which have been hugely successful, that one can't really talk too much about right now. I feel that brings up a bit of a natural tension point, because the game Flesh and Blood is designed to be played in the Flesh and Blood. Like, that's one of like James's big visions around the creation of the game. There is weighing that up against giving people an opportunity to play against sort of the top players in various regions around the world. So that again will be a bit of a discussion going on further at the office as to what eventually Skirmish will look like going forward. I can't really go super into detail on that as to like how many Skirmish seasons will be each year. But I think it's safe to say there'll certainly be sort of a role for Skirmish going forward. what that role is exactly may adjust because, when we start having things like, you know, multiple callings in different regions each year, and like Road to Nationals, things like Pro Tours, Pro Quests around. Skirmish we'll have to see where Skirmish fits around that.
Mhm.
But at the moment, I think it's in a pretty good spot. I think it's really good at achieving its goal, which is, giving players who might have just played a few armor events here and there a meaningful shot at some competitive play and a chance to win some really cool prizes as well.
Yeah, 100%. All right, let's move into some. We got a few final sort of bit more light questions. We'll let you off the hook a little bit, Kieran, with official duties as an LSS representative. Do you still find
Sweet.
time? Do you still find time to play, Kieran? Are you still playing the game? What's happening there?
Not as much as I'd like at the moment, to be honest, because like I say, I absolutely love playing Flesh and Blood. Like, I'm on there when the new sets and everything come out. It's like one of the first things I do is I sit down and, I'm jotting out different deck ideas and everything because I'm not so involved in the on the dev side anymore. So I feel a bit more free that if I make a deck and take it down to the local armory, it's kind of like copy me at your peril. Like the one thing at the moment is I'm also just finishing off some stuff relating to my law degree. So I'm doing what's called professionals in quotation air marks at the moment, which for our American listeners is probably something akin to like the bar exam you sit, so that you can get a practicing certificate. That in New Zealand is sort of consists of about a 3.5-4 month course with basically assignments every week ranging in 1,000-1,500 words. So unfortunately, a lot of my time at the moment is kind of like go to work and then come home, and a bit of a constant cycle of these assignments, which doesn't leave as much time as I'd like to go and play armories and things like that, or skirmish events or whatever. I'm actually entered into the charity constructed events. The one organized by like sort of Matt Rogers, Nick Butcher, and supported by a whole host of community superstars. So that's been a bit of fun. I've been playing what I call a March of the Munchkins Katsu deck in that, classic constructed. But I think once I get through to about August and I'm finishing off the Law Prof stuff, I'm definitely going to make a big effort to actually show up at my local game stores around in Auckland and get to interact with players a bit more and actually play in the Flesh and Blood, which I really enjoy doing.
That's awesome. And Kieran, of course, we're lucky to have you here today. One half of Session Blood, yourself and Carol. Maybe you can give us a little bit of an inside scoop to our listeners, but what's your future sort of plans for the channel and the podcast with you and Carol?
Yeah, so Session Blood's been like a little bit of a tricky one because obviously now that we both work at the company and Carol's on the dev side, we do have to be a little bit more careful what we talk about. That's part of that. We had a Patreon at one point, but we, took that down when we both work at the company because I think it's, just not great optics if we have that up while we're both working there. As far as the podcast goes going forward, what we've sort of tried to pivot to recently is rather than sort of analyzing competitive metagames or tournaments, which again is a little bit difficult with Carol being on the dev side, we still might do like a little bit of a breakdown or review of tournaments every so often, but we also have been doing our best to try and like interview players that may not have been sort of given as much spotlight as we feel they deserve. So, I mean, we start off with Dante, who, to be honest, he's featured on the Fat TCG homepage, like everyone knows Dante. But I think we're making sort of a conscious effort to try and sort of track down players, like international players from around, and just have like a good talk to them about their local community, about their Flesh and Blood journey, what they enjoy doing, just to kind of show everyone else in the fab world that. And this is no shade against Matt Rogers. Matt Rogers is an amazing player, but I feel he's kind of one of the very few recognizable names, if I can put it that way, that when you talk about competitive fab players, you say Matt Rogers and everyone's like, oh yeah, I know Matt Rogers, like LeBron James, NBA, like everyone knows Matt. But we just want to try do our part to sort of bring to the attention of the community, there's actually these really, really good players elsewhere in the world as well, and we feel like they've actually got a lot to bring to the table and it would actually be quite helpful to listen to them. One thing we do want to get back to a little bit more is doing gameplay videos. So I think we're pretty close to 1,000 subscribers, and we kind of had this idea that once we reach 1,000 subscribers, we we'll really get back into doing a few gameplay videos here and there because they've been quite popular. Again, it's a little difficult because we can't exactly just tell Carol like, all right, sweet, like just bust out the mega tuned dev list of X class, and we'll play this on stream. But one thing we've been trying to push is people in community sending us deck lists, for example. Like I've played this deck list in my local armory, having a bit of trouble. Would you mind playing on stream? Or like, here's an idea I've had. I'll do this. So I think we will try and get a few more gameplay videos back in, and we'll definitely try to do a sort of interviewing thing where we interview some players. Which reminds me, actually, big shout out to I've lost his last name now, but big shout out to Winton, a player who won the ProQuest in Auckland on Control Katsu, Winton Bedford. Big shout out to you. I feel we might want to get him on the channel at some point. So this is a player that only his second ever Classic Constructed tournament, and he won it on Control Katsu, or sort of a hybrid Katsu deck, beating out the chains. And that's the type of player that I feel people may not necessarily heard about, but we feel like, if you're winning a 120 person tournament against a bunch of top players, I feel like what you have to say is probably pretty valuable, and players could learn from that.
Yep. Yeah, Control Katsu's good archetype, right?
Yeah, I know you and Sasha are big fans of that one. Yeah, so Session Blood going forward, like, again, we'll probably be doing a few more interviews here and there, maybe the occasional sort of strategy breakdown. But yeah, gameplay videos we'd love to get back into. We just need to work out the exact logistics behind that, because we don't want to be in a business of just revealing sort of certain decks that haven't been out there in the meta, or like breaking formats or accidentally revealing things that players haven't yet discovered or anything like that. But at the same time, we're really keen to keep like bringing content to the community and help out with that.
Yeah, awesome.
Absolutely. So I think we're just going to go straight into like the rapid fire fun questions. So I know we've kind of alluded to this a bit, but what is the competition like in the office? Do you guys host any in-house tournaments? Is it competitive? I mean, we have like, we have a lot of highly ranked competitors now working at LSS, and obviously James is a titan of a player himself. So what is that like?
Yeah, so we have the the occasional in-house tournament, like the in-house Monarch pre-release that we did. We did a bit of a practice team sealed as well before the battle hardened, which was a bit of fun. And like sometimes was that sorry?
So it didn't help though, did it?
No, well, my team actually.
I'm just pulling your chain.
Yeah, but we actually Carol, me and Callum, I know it was a bit of a stop and start tournament because there were like a lot of things going on, but I'm just going to go ahead and claim that we won the in-house team sealed pre-release,
nice. Okay,
or whatever it was. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, like a lot of the testing is just sort of serious dev testing. So like, the devs on their side are just testing things in advance because, obviously they've got to test upcoming sets well in advance for lead-in times of printing and all that sort of thing. But yeah, we do get to play sort of the occasional draft and a little bit here and there. I mean, once I'm finished up my lore process, I'll probably start bringing in my classic constructed decks to maybe have a bit of a jam against the devs after they finish for the day. So yeah, I mean, a bit here and there when we have time would be the answer.
That's great. And I have to ask, who has the best win rate in the studio? And please don't tell us it's Sasha.
Definitely me, 100%. So
correct answer.
No, that's a bit of a difficult one. I honestly don't have a good answer for you on that one. I feel when we have these kind of like in-house drafts or steel deck events and stuff like that, I feel it's generally pretty competitive. I feel like I don't really have a big enough of a sample size to tell you who's got the sort of most winning record. But yeah, like you said, it's always good fun because there's a lot of very competitive players there.
We'll just say it's you. We'll just say it's you.
But I mean, for all listeners, we'll just say it's me.
Yeah. Do you get to see much of the design process? And you said before that you were obviously you came on initially as a contract, for the dev side. Do you get to see much of that in development? And I won't ask more than that, but just feel free to hype up how awesome it is. Is there a lot of stuff behind the scenes you get to see, and you walk past in the morning and see some things and just kind of go like, wow, that's exciting, that's awesome?
Yeah, like a little bit here and there, but it's something that's when I was doing sort of the contracting dev work, then yeah, like I saw a lot of the cards and sets and stuff that I guess we needed access to in order to be able to test that kind of thing. These days, kind of not so much because more over on the OP side, um, like seeing, for some things I have a general awareness of what might be coming up. Um, and it's funny kind of moving from the dev over to the OP side. Sometimes it's more like, oh, like, I wonder what the new stuff is, and like I'm not playing as many games anymore, that kind of thing. But I feel as I've been there a little bit longer, I've actually actively tried to stay a little bit more away. Reason for that I feel is because that means if I'm wanting to play some casual games here and there, or if I'm like, wanting to have a bit of a chat with my friends about the game, I stay out of group chats where it's like testing teams and stuff like that, because even though I don't have any particular insight, I don't feel that's a good look. Just me being part of those. But I feel if I want to have like general discussions about the game, or like people talking about like, oh, I'm trying this in a new hero, I feel like if I don't actually have that dev knowledge, if I kind of stay away from that, I feel a bit more comfortable talking generally about things. Whereas, yeah, if I'm kind of over on the dev side, sort of constantly looking through things, or talking about things, that it can make it a little bit harder. I guess I will say, yeah, like one thing I will say, because like basically I'm just gonna be incredibly vague because I don't want to give absolutely anything at all away. But yeah, I feel the upcoming set is probably, I'd say, like, yeah, like hands down the most fun, best set I've ever seen in like a trading card game. So I think it's going to be like super, super great. Honestly, I can't say anything more beyond that, but I think it's honestly awesome. I think players are going to be stoked. So yeah, it's a little bit of hype up.
Yeah, I've heard that for multiple people, is that Kingdoms is kind of just the apex of. I mean, it's limited specifically is what they really alluded to. Is it's a limited format, and Kingdoms is just amazing. But Kieran, I want to ask you, what is it like? I know you said you stray away from it now, but what was it like, kind of walking around the office and seeing the best decks, every day that hadn't been discovered by the community yet? And sometimes you go on Facebook or you go on some of these social media platforms and people be like, okay, this is broken, that's broken, this deck is unbeatable. But I'm assuming that what is actually very strong is quite different.
Yeah, that might have to be like a little bit of a no comment for me, because I'm not really sure what I can and can't say in relation to that. To be
if it's
perfectly
Azalea,
honest.
you can just nod your head up and down.
Yep, I mean, what I will say is that, like, everyone was absolutely shocked because Azalea tier 1 highest win rate. I won't do you like that.
You heard it
But
here.
yeah, it was interesting having a talk to some of the devs about their opinions on like the meta game, and like maybe sort of what decks would work, what decks wouldn't, all that kind of jazz. I mean, just one thing, like on a personal note, I feel sometimes this isn't coming from a dev's perspective, but my personal one is that I feel I've always said this pretty consistently: as the player base expands and the card pool expands and stuff like that, but particularly the player base, and as people, like you say, get better and better from playing against sort of more skilled players and things like Skirmish, I feel it's going to be unlikely that we'll have something similar to the old Welcome to Rathe, Arcane Rising, Crucible meta, where there was really that dash deck that was like dominant for a very long stretch of time. And like I've said, like for a long time now, I feel, of course, that deck in and of itself was a very strong, inherently powerful deck. But I think a little bit that also contributed to its success is that the player base, like the competitive Classic Constructor player base, was still relatively small at that time, and I feel like there were kind of decks out there that didn't necessarily have like an incredibly good matchup, but that could kind of go toe to toe with it, but that people weren't necessarily playing those decks.
I can say, Kieran, I completely agree with you on that. I think I've talked blue in the face about that exact same statement.
Yeah, because I feel like when you see cards in Crucible meta like Arc Smash that were printed like in Brute, then you look at it and be like, okay, this kills Chambers. I'm casting my eye around tournaments and I'm not seeing any Brute players. That single card made me play Brute at Nationals. I hadn't had a lot of experience on Brute, but I'm like, you know what? I'm not going into this tournament and losing to Induction Chamber. Then, proceeded to lose one of my rounds in the Swiss 2-mat on Dash. But, at least the game was close. At least it was very close. So like certainly, sorry, to circle back to your question, I feel like yes, in the early stages there will be decks that the sort of devs have discovered that the general public hasn't. Um, I feel as the game gets bigger and bigger and there's more and more players, they're playing more and more tournaments. I feel maybe that gap will narrow a little bit more. That's just my personal opinion. That like there won't necessarily be like a number of exclusive decks that the players haven't tested. Maybe the players will even come up with things that the devs haven't thought of. And I don't think it's if that does come to pass, I wouldn't say that's necessarily a failing on behalf of the dev. Flesh and blood of the dev team. It would more just be. I think that would be quite a good watershed moment to show that, like, hey, these players are so good that they can actually they're on the same they're on that level with devs. They're coming up with all these cool interactions that maybe we hadn't necessarily thought of or tested all that much.
Yeah, I have a cool story from that as well. Back in Welcome to Rathe, when Sasha and I had really dug our teeth into the Katsu control, and it's Katsu control as a shell, but it's more just of a drone of brutality deck. There was really nothing like it, at least publicly available. So we went to the studio. So we went to Legendary Studios when I had flown over to New Zealand. Obviously, Sasha flew over as well, and we had like an exhibition match against Chris Gehring. It was filmed, but they didn't put it up because it was like 2.5 hours, right? But they had told we had brought our deck, like, oh yeah, we know about that deck, and then I proceeded to watch Chris absolutely smash it with another deck, like literally wasn't even close. Right before the calling, so I was like, geez. Made me feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's one of it's cool decks like that, I think, as well. That I think that was probably like the one deck in the tournament that was very unexpected. Because going to the tournaments, like there's going to be a lot of Katsu, a lot of Dorinthia, a fair bit of Guardian, and a small number of Brood decks. Kind of know what all these decks do, but the Katsu control was a cool one because it was something I think it showed very early on in the life of the game that are multiple ways to play these heroes. I think like happened with Dorinthia as well. There were some more defensive Dorinthia decks and some more aggressive ones, but the Katsu control in particular was, one of those difficult ones to play of. And I still remember like thinking, I'm playing this game, and it's kind of like I chat to Sasha a bit about it sometimes as well. We reminisce about the good old days, but of how I was playing that final. I was feeling like pretty good at the start of it, pretty good in the mid game with the life lead, and then as the game started to sort of tighten up a bit. I realized kind of as I was starting to run low on cards, I realized that like my way out of that game was meant to be holding on to Megenshi's release and using it with Snapdragon Scalers. Because I was like, wait a second, like he's trying to mill me out, so he's trying to fatigue me out effectively here. Like one workaround to this is I just wait for the ultra late game. I use my Tunic to pop a Megenshi's, and then I just Snapdragon it, and I just hard cast a Lord of Wind and pitch like 3 blue cards. Shuffle 9 cards back in, and then we're good to go. Unfortunately, by the time I realized this, it was about 4 turns after I'd cracked my Snapdragon Scalers. Yeah. I'm sitting there looking at my deck going like, I've got 1 Razor Reflex left, and I know he's got 1 million defense reactions. Like, this is going to be a very long grind to try to win this game. But I think it's cool. Like, kind of, like, with diverse decks and, like, new decks, innovative decks, just figuring out, like, sort of different strategies to play them, different ways to play against them. And yeah, I feel we're going to see more and more of that as the card pool expands and more people play.
Yeah. And I just have one last question for you, Kieran, and that is, obviously this is going to be, on your government and COVID permitting, but do you currently have any plans to travel to the US calling yourself?
I guess we'll have to see. We'll have to see on that one, to be perfectly honest with you. Yeah, I mean, as far as like a little bit of it will be sort of COVID restrictions, government restrictions, health and safety, that kind of thing. I can say is that like I did initially have plans to travel to the US towards the end of the year, kind of a little bit business, a little bit personal, because my partner, she's actually American. She hasn't been able to go home for so she's studying here at the moment as well. So she hasn't been able to go home for the past sort of like 1.5, 2 years plus. So obviously a lot of like issues as well with sort of non-citizens, non-permanent residents. If you leave, like, you don't want to not be able to get back in, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So as far as the calling goes, honestly, that like a firm decision hasn't been made one way or the other going forward on that. What I will say is that if everything works out it's it would be nice to turn up to something like a major North American event, something like the Calling, something like US Nationals, for example, just to have a bit of a presence. But like I said, none of that's been set in stone just yet. It would more be if health and safety restrictions and the government sort of restrictions allow it, then that's certainly something we'll consider. But it's not really something we can commit to. I mean, one thing I was thinking, if my partner and I were going to sort of travel towards the end of the year and go see her family and go see the States, I was definitely going to try work in with the timing so that we were there for at least one big flesh and blood event in North America. And I could drop by and say hello to all the cool people in the community over there.
Yeah, I love how you say drop by. You're actually, I think you're a bigger celebrity than you think here in the US.
Oh, stop it! No,
blushing.
I was joking with a few people saying like I'm gonna have to practice a little bit because you have that turning up to have that term, obviously like gunslinging, I guess, where you sit down and you like play against members of the community. And I was thinking, geez, by that point I'll have to put some serious hours in because I'd hate to show up. They're like, yo, it's Kieran from Session Blood or from LSS, and I turn up and proceed to go like 0 for 8. And so, it's kind of a never meet your heroes moment. And yes, I did. Refer to myself as a hero there. Sure, I slipped that in.
He's legend, hero. He's called himself everything under the sun today. Look, Kieran, thank you so much for joining us and being on. Before we let you go, anything, last things you want to plug or let our listeners know about from your side?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've been trying to push is this community-given nickname to call me Mr. Classic in reference to my former being Classic Instructor, which I've done fairly well in the past. And when I say community nickname, I do that heavily in quotation marks because basically I've invented this. I've tried to push it. It's gone nowhere. But, I feel if I drop it on the channel, maybe it'll get some uptick. No, but in all seriousness, I do want to give a huge shout out to you guys in particular with running the Arsenal Pass podcast. I feel a way like I've been wanting to jump on your podcast for a while. We do our best to kind of direct players, just from a personal, not from a business perspective, but from a personal, myself and Carol. I kind of see you guys being a bit of a, maybe a spiritual successor in a way to Session Blood. Like we made that podcast with the intention of having a place for competitive players and people competitively minded to really jump in and listen to things that could like help improve their game. Maybe a few tips here and there, maybe some strategic breakdowns, maybe a few gameplay videos. And I feel you guys have done like a really, really good job of that. And so I just wanted to express my appreciation for you guys like doing this role for the community, basically. The other ones, obviously big shout out to Push the Point podcast as well. I know that's run by Simon Denny, a player over in the UK, and a few of his friends, I believe. And honestly, just a big shout out to all the Flesh and Blood players and all the LGS players. All the LGS around. I know a lot of them are running skirmish events. I know a lot of places have been running organized play during like really difficult circumstances with lockdowns and everything like that. And I just really respect all the hard work and effort they've put in. Being on the other side of it, seeing these LGS owners saying, we might not be able to run our tournament to this, with these numbers due to COVID restrictions, but what about if we do this? Can we potentially do this? Like, if we can't move it online, can I potentially run like this tournament with like 4 different pods of this and this and this? Basically, store owners going out of their way to provide a service to players so they can come join together in Flesh and Blood. So, you guys are the real MVPs. Awesome. Love it. Love that.
Yeah, they've done a fantastic job.
Mic drop.
But we're honoured to have had you on, Kieran. Thank you so much for your time and all the best.
Sweet ass. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here and keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing.
Thanks again.
All right, and that's going to wrap up episode 10 of the pod. Just want to give a big shout out to Kieran for coming on and doing that interview with us, for giving up his time and allowing me and Brendan to pepper him with some questions. Before we leave off the pod, I did want to say, if you haven't seen the deck tech we put up this week for the Chain Classic Constructor deck, that's up on the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel. And we'd love to hear, what deck techs would you like to see in the future, whether that be format specific or class specific. Drop a comment and let us know. Brendan, anything else from you before we leave off?
Yeah, again, just want to thank, shout out and big thank you to Kieran for joining us. It was awesome to finally have him on the pod and talk to him. Hayden and I kind of started this journey as fans of Session Blood. And I've been a fan of Kieran pretty much since the game came out. So super awesome having him on. Thank you so much again. And obviously, guys, if you haven't heard of it yet, he does have a podcast called Session Blood. Go show it some love. They've got great content over there. And lastly, I just want to shout out the Fab Gauntlet that's run by the official Discord. We've had, consistently 45 to 50 to 60 players per week running Blitz, usually 5 rounds of Swiss, cut to top 8. You can find all that information in the Discord. The channels are really easy to see in terms of announcements, and it's about $5 to enter, and we raffle off a box to one participant, and the winner gets a box as well. If you want to check out our last week's final, by the way, that is on YouTube. So if you just YouTube search Fab Discord, you'll find it. I think it's week 12. It was probably one of the best final games we've ever had. It was Tower Number 9 versus Let's on Ira. And it was one of the most, like I just said already, it's one of the most incredible games I've watched. Tower banished both his Art of Wars and had to find one of the most convoluted lethal situations that I've seen, and won the game with 0 cards left. So it was incredible. But with that, this has been episode 10. Thank you so much for listening, and good luck to everyone participating in Skirmish this weekend. We'll see you next week.
Bye.